Hi, it's Jail, and last weekend I got into my head to sit down and record a sort of director's commentary for the poster that I've been promoting, which is my attempt to get every ship from Star Citizen lore into one place. I've been making this while going through old documents to try and build out the Star Citizen Tools wiki, get it nice and complete in time for Invictus, and it's been a fun process. In doing so, I just came up with all these little stories, and I thought it might be fun to just share them. However, when I sat down and just did this unscripted ramble off the top of my head, it ended up being more than an hour long. So I've split it into two parts. This part is all the ships which are known by their class, so that's ships that we actually have art for. And then the next section will be all the ships that just exist in lore in a document somewhere. And I think that second part is kind of a little bit more fun because it's got all the really hidden little nuggets on it. But there's some really interesting stuff in this first part as well. And this was an unscripted ramble, mostly from memory, so there's a lot of corrections that pop up where I've misremembered things. There's just some random asides that are kind of silly, I suppose, but just this is kind of like the experience of what it would be like if I kidnapped you and tied you to a chair and then made you listen to me. So enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the channel. This is Jail. I thought it might be interesting to go through my ship names poster. I made this, it's using research from other people as well as a lot of research that I put into it myself, and there's been a lot of interest in it. But what I can't relate in an infographic is the diversity of sources, the hidden stories behind little obscure ships, and the sort of different levels of canonicity that some of these things have. So if you want a long format droning talk through all these different names, you've come to the right place. It's not going to be flashy, but if it's not for your taste, then that's fine. Just thought it might be fun as a little low effort, relaxing thing to do on a Sunday. So we're going to start with the Bengal, and right off the gate I've got to explain my little sort of dagger ones, these ones marked with a dagger. So there's three different ship classes where the first ship that we know was ever made shares the name of the class. So we know that's true for the Hammerhead, the Idris, and the Polaris. It literally just means the first one that's manufactured is called Idris, or Hammerhead, or Polaris. Now, that's a fairly common thing in the real world as well. The class name will usually be shared with the first ship. There's even a joke, or not joke, but reference to this in the Carrack. So the first Carrack was just called R11, I think, R11, or was it S11? Yes, R11. And that was nicknamed UEES Carrack by her crew in reference to this tradition, even though it wasn't officially named that. So I take this to mean that all classes share their name with their lead ship. So there would have been a UEES Bengal. But it's not in lore. But as you can see, that matches with the Barbary and Krugeri as being these wild species of cat. That's also a tradition of Chris Rogers games going back. He likes naming things after big cats. In fact, the Pegasus was originally called the Panther. If you don't know, well, Bengal cat or Bengal tiger, Barbary lions, and Krugeri are a type of sub-Saharan African lion, I believe. But we got these three other Bengals which don't match that. So the Indomitable comes from the original version of the Tyrannus Galactic Guide. It was said to have been destroyed in the asteroid belt there, but that remark was actually removed from later versions of the Galactic Guide, so it may well be that that has been sort of expunged from lore. And I'm going to say about things where they changed the lore, that's not criticism of that practice. I think that's entirely understandable in a game under development. I just like documenting things and archiving them. That's just fun for me. The Leviathan similarly has a bit of a sticky position in lore. We have a lot of in-fiction fiction, so that's stories which are fictional even within the world of the fiction. Like you're reading a novel that someone's written in this world. Now, the Leviathan appears in a story called Last Flight of the Seraphim, and because it's in this in-fiction fiction, it's kind of ambiguous whether it really existed or not. And they've left that kind of deliberately ambiguous, which I kind of enjoy. There's like one example is there's this whole archaeology story about this colony ship called the Artemis that went missing, and it follows this archaeologist who's like an Indiana Jones character as she goes across the Stanton system finding bits of this ship that set out at sublight speeds from Earth hundreds of years ago. And we know that person exists from other lore, so this person is like a real person, except it's been confirmed that that story didn't happen. It's a fictional story about a real person. So when you see a ship that's referenced in one of these fictionalized stories, it's not clear if that's actually a complete fabrication or if it's going to be something where, there is actually this real thing, but it's like if you write a story about something that's happening on a real ship. I put them all on here, though, because I think they still represent ideas around the naming conventions of Navy ships. Leviathan, of course, is a sort of biblical sea monster. And one of my favourite animals is actually named Leviathan melville. It's an ancestor of the sperm whale. They had to use the Incan or Peruvian version of Leviathan because there was already a genus called Leviathan. Paul's Steed is the oldest ship that in the lore in the sense of when we heard about it, because that is the Bengal carrier that's in the original Kickstarter trailers. And I was also kind of thinking of this one as, is it even canonical anymore? It was originally conceived as the carrier that Squadron 42 would be assigned to. That since seems to have been replaced by like the UEE Stanton and the Krugeri, and like we don't really hear anything about the Paul Steed occurring in Squadron 42 anymore. Like there hasn't been any rumours about that. It is, however, referenced again in another one of these in fiction stories called Void Rats, which we'll come back to later as well. It says, the Steed, it's like a really good new ship, but it's full of F8 Lightnings, and we've got this crappy old ship and the Hornets. So I kind of do still think that it hung around more than just like the trailer. It's the interesting thing though is that in that trailer, they say, it's currently flying through the Vega. The Kurosawa system in the Vega sector, which are obviously like not really related to how the lore develops. Vega became a system where originally in the Wing Commander lore it was a sector, and Kurosawa just appears to be a reference to the director Kurosawa. So there's all this kind of clearly non-canonical information around it, but yet it does pop up a couple of times. It is interesting because Paul Steed is actually a real person, or he was a collaborator of Chris Roberts, who tragically died, I believe, in 2012. So it is a memorial to a person who is real, and I like keeping. I would like it to still be part of lore. And speaking of these gold names, I've segregated things that match a pattern to things that don't match a pattern. I believe that it's good that there is a pattern in how not everything matches a pattern. Yes, if you've got this big navy, you're going to have naming conventions, but you should also have things that break convention, things where they're named in tribute to a ship long ago, or named in tribute to a person, or just not quite matching the pattern. And that, to me, enriches things. So I'm not putting those out to say these are bad things. I like that there's an Indomitable, a Leviathan, and a Paul Steed, as well as a Bengal, Barber, and Krugeri. So move on to the Hammerheads, which is the one where we have the most, and almost all of this comes from the Hammerhead. It's a Whitley's Guide, and that's the brochure that was done for the Hammerhead. Every ship that launches these days has a PDF brochure, and a lot of them will also have a Whitley's Guide in Jump Point, which is like a deep dive into their history. And for some of them, I think for the Hammerhead in particular, they're one and the same. They made the brochure to be a Whitley's Guide. Something I always also really like about this is that they gave us this breakdown of like the model developing over the couple of hundred years it's been in production. It's one of the places where you get the most lore about the idea of a flight of ships. We also see this in the Idris lore, that there's a Flight 1 and a Flight 2. And it's this idea of they have a model, but then they iterate upon it and they change it. It's still called a Hammerhead, but we've got like new model updates. And if you go on the StarCitizen.tools wiki page about the Hammerhead, actually about the idea of flight, you can find a breakdown of like all the different changes. And we also get this kind of with the Constellation, which, because it's not a military ship, or not a military capital-ish ship, they're just called like Mark. But there's like Mark 1, 2, 3, and we're currently on like Mark 4 constellations. And if you go back in the lore, Mark 1 constellations didn't even have a Merlin. It had like a 2-seater cockpit, and it's like a fundamentally different ship. And I like the idea of a universe that's evolving, that it has this sort of idea of a history and provenance. Also, for great name conventions, sort of naming after sea creatures. And I've had so many comments about the fact that I put UEES Thresher in gold. But there is a good reason for that. So Thresher is this one that appears in one of the anniversary shows when they're just launching the Hammerhead. And we've got a galactic tour, with Jax, and he's touring a serving Hammerhead. And that is the UEES Thresher. Now, there's a thing called a Thresher Shark, so you'd think it would match Flight 1 sea life names. However, Flight 1 do not serve anymore. They've been out of service for 140 years, and there are some Flight 3 around, but it looks like it's a Flight 4. It looks like the same model that we players get. So it doesn't match the idea of it being a water deity. Therefore, it doesn't match current naming conventions. Now, it could be like, we're naming it after one that was Flight 1, and we sort of reusing that name in tribute, but we don't have that law, so I can't make that assessment. So it's in gold. Just want to defend my design decisions there. Perseus brings us the most recent name I added, the one that looks like it's really misspelled, but that's how you spell it. So the Perseus kind of contains the some of the oldest known class ships, because they actually go all the way back to the UPE, and also one of the newest because it was in the most recent video. So Arash, Bunjil, and Achilles, they are all in the Perseus brochure, and you'll notice that Arash and Bunjil, they predate the formation of the United Empire of Earth. They were first Tavaran warships, and that's where you get Arash and Bunjil, and then the Achilles is later. And we also have now I had to look up a lot on the pronunciation of this. I believe it's pronounced Curraheath, or Curraith. It's Welsh, so it's a little bit difficult to find references, particularly when it's something which is like, it's not a commonly referenced thing. There's this is one of the ones where we can assume that there was a lead ship called Perseus, and that matches this pattern of it being like mythological and historical heroes. Something I really like about Arash and Bunjil, the Persian and this Aboriginal Australian one, those are actually kind of goes a bit beyond, and they're culture heroes, which is this pan-human idea that you find in mythology all around the world of a figure who's a warrior, and he's just like the best guy, and he's going, but he goes and like outsmarts the gods, or brings up some new technology, or even like creates the land that the people then live on. So you've got like Maui, and you've got you can even sort of read this into like Prometheus or King Arthur, and as these sort of mythological heroes that are really like paragons of that culture. And there's so many to draw on, because it's such a it's something you can identify in mythologies all around the world. So I would really like to hear more about like other ones of those. Carrack is obviously not matching that pattern. It's more of just a monster from Welsh mythology that sort of wails when someone dies abroad who's from... Sorry, when I say wails, I mean like cries, screams when someone from the country of Wales dies overseas or something like that. It's a cool looking name though, and it was such a tiny reference that you have to kind of just get a magnifying glass out to spot that was in the video. But I'm that kind of pedant, so I'm going to find that. So moving on to the Idris, and there's one where I was really tempted not to put it on, but let's go through these. So there's two Idrises mentioned in the Whitley's Guide. So that's the UEEN Idris and UEEN Ashton. Now I decided to keep those prefixes and not correct them because I think they are just simply incorrect. I make that mistake all the time. UES, UEN, UEM is kind of easy to get those mixed up. But that is how they appear in the guide. Now, you could say, oh, well, it was like really early in the UEE. Maybe they hadn't used the same prefix. So I can't make that assertion myself. I've been trying to get some clarification on that. And yeah, the first one was called the Idris, second one was called the Ashton. These were the Flight 1 ones. The Ashton caught fire. In fact, they all kept catching fire, but the Ashton was one that really, really caught fire. And that's why they changed it to the Flight 2s. The UEES Stanton is the one that we've toured on the Squadron 42 vertical slice. It's the one that's we got a lot of information about their crew, so you can read all about Captain Noah White, who's played by Liam Cunningham, and that's all on the wiki. It's all quite interesting stuff. The Banshee is the one that I was really tempted not to put on there. So the Banshee appears in a season 1 around the verse sneak peek, and you can just about read UEE Banshee on the side, and it's oh, is that really canon? That is the most tenuous thing. But it matches this pattern of Idris, Banshee, and Stanton all being systems of the UEE. And there's another one which we'll get to later where there's a ship called UEES Crowshaw. Again, that would be another system. So I think to help reinforce the pattern, it was interesting to know that they think of, again, this is just more speaking about the minds of the designers than anything about in law, that if you're coming up with a name for an Idris, you're going to think of a system. Of course, that would kind of put quite a low upper limit on how many Idrises that it could possibly field. Maybe they're going to get more specific, so it could be the UEES Prime for or UES they say Kazi, don't they? Sorry, those are cities on Terra, and there's one called that is spelled Quasi, which Americans like to pronounce Quasi, but they've chosen to pronounce it make up this dialect and call it Kazi, which is Northern British slang for a particularly unpleasant toilet, a brick shit house kind of situation. And it really makes the idea of the space cow, which is the Kazi Grazer, a very unpleasant name. Anyway, moving on from that brief digression. Now, speaking about this UEE prefix, that's what's printed on the side of the ship. Now, we also see in early Squadron 42 materials that the Stanton is marked UEE Stanton on the side. So you could surmise that since they've updated that to UES, then also this early Banshee would be. But I chose not to do that because for the same reason I didn't change the UEN. No idea where Ashton comes from. Have no idea what that's referencing. Presumably it's referencing a person though, because that's a person's name. Probably just referencing a person's real thing. You see real references there's a squadron which is called the Red Raiders, which is also a sports team near around Austin. I think it's a women's rugby team or something. So there's personal references in any game, and Star Citizen's no exception. And I chose not. Now there's one which I did choose not to put on here, which is that if you look closely at the Invictus 2950 tour, there were Idrises there, and they said UEE Gauntlet on the side. The reason I chose not to is because that we know that the Gauntlet is a Javelin, and both of the Idrises that we saw had the same marking. So I just view that as placeholder, and I don't see any reason to view that as canon. To have something where it would be a name that is being used in canon somewhere else, and also being used in duplicate in the same location. That just seems to me that would be the fact that every Javelin says UEE01 on it as its call sign number, and that would be assuming that they're all UEE01. No, it's just placeholder stuff. Let's be realistic about that. So moving on to the Retribution. Is the only Retribution. Kind of couldn't decide whether I want to put that gold or blue because we don't really know if there's a pattern. And we don't even know if they're going to make more than one Retribution. It is a secret project. It's the biggest ship that the UEE's ever made, apparently. And it's certainly... I can imagine them having the Retribution, Vengeance, the Payback, but I don't think they're going to be making a huge run of those ships. The Pegasus, originally called the Panther, they were speaking about this recently. We're not going to see it in Squadron 42 episode 1, but apparently maybe episode 2 or 3. Now, we don't... The only one that we've heard a name of confirmed is the Chimera, and that pops up in some really interesting places. So we see them hailing the Stanton in the Squadron 42 trailer. In the bit on the bridge, they'll be talking, and then you go, "Oh, Chimera coming," and they talk.
Hi. Nice to meet you. My name's Lieutenant Valen, comms. Oh, sorry, Lieutenant. Back to work. Stanton here, Chimera. Go for priority comm traffic.
But how do we know that Chimera is a Pegasus? Well, if you look very closely on the jacket of Randall Graves, who is John Rhys Davis's character, you can see that it says UES Chimera, and it has the call sign number that starts with CVE. I can't remember the number, and it's a picture of Pegasus. So that's why I identify that as a Pegasus. Yeah. Okay. So again, we got we only have one name, but we can assume there's Pegasus, Greek mythological creatures, and we'll come back to that later. That there's a couple where we got ones named after mythological creatures, and they maybe say they're a carrier. So you can kind of think maybe that's Pegasus. Okay. So the Nautilus. This is another controversial one. We only have one reference to a named Nautilus. It comes from the Nautilus brochure again, and it is said to be a 2601 model Nautilus, and all it says is this system was first used in action by the naval ship Peace to great effect in Operation Blindside, and that was referring to the elimination of some notoriously violent pirates called the Big Hats, which is the least threatening name for a notoriously violent pirate crew, which I like. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. So it doesn't actually say UEES Peace, but I take it that if you've got this in a brochure and they're saying it is a naval ship, then it's going to be like an officially named naval ship. And then you'd have the obvious UEES Nautilus at some point. Though I'm just realising maybe is there a mistake if it was brought in even earlier? Oh, phew, no. I was suddenly worried that I made a mistake and that the Nautilus would have been brought in under the UPE, so it should be UPES Nautilus. But no, the first model launched 3 years after the UEE was founded. So there we go. It was simply that they were inspired by things from the First Fire War. Disaster averted. But yeah, so the brochure makes the point that you think about these more in the squadron sense. So the idea of there being noteworthy individual ships just doesn't really apply. So I put the idea of like these squadron names, Alley Vipers, Black Hearts, Night Flyers, and there's a really cool stuff about like fighter squadrons as well on the wiki, where they all have these sort of names and insignias which seem to be more not unofficial. They seem to be like recognized, but they're certainly not sort of they certainly seem to have come about more from the squadrons themselves, developing like an identity, like the Red Raiders I was referencing earlier. So yeah, there's no pattern there yet, and we mostly hear about ships that are either distinguishing themselves or crashing horribly into something. That's why they end up in lore, because they've done something noteworthy. If your ship's just been wandering around doing normal service, why is it going to end up in an article telling us about it? So that's why you don't really, I guess that's why they don't really hear much about Nautiluses, and there's only really a couple of stories that include them. Carrack, everyone's favourite ship. This is interesting though, because it kind of is one of the later references to the idea of every ship having a number. So the original Paul Steed ship that we saw was called like CV032, and every capital ship class has this letter code that it appears would match this idea of serial number, essentially. Not so it's partly a serial number. So they're composed of a letter to denote what the ship is. So like a Corvette would be K, and the Carrack is split into R and S depending on mission. Then hyphen and a size. So a Carrack is a size 1, and we would infer probably that a Bengal is a size 0. And then a serial number. So we would infer from this that like Paul Steed would be the 32nd one. And we also have serial numbers for a lot of the Hammerheads, where they're PCG and then a 4-letter code. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're the same format though, because they don't seem to have like the size class. I would expect like a Carrack and a Hammerhead to be in about the same size class, and it's supposed to be that one is greater than 65 meters. I can't imagine that. That they don't seem to be have a size class number. So there isn't a consistent idea of a serial number at the moment, but all we know is that the Carracks have that, and anything is then like an unofficial name. People ask me why I didn't put the Hercules and the Gemini on this. The Hercules, we know, doesn't have official names, and the only unofficial names we've seen are like said to be nicknames. So there's this ship called Mama Bird, which appears in the Hercules brochure, and it appears in the recent Invictus trailer, and that is said to be a nickname. I don't know what its like number would be, so I don't really feel like I've got anything to put on this. But I'm talking about it here. So maybe in a future version, or if we get more stuff about like the role of Hercules starlifters in the Navy, then we'll find out about that. So the Polaris is like the newest ship in lore. Like it launched only a couple of years ago. I think it's like 5 years ago, and so it hasn't had much time to build up a backstory or like a set of names that are in the annals of greatness. The brochure for the Polaris is actually set. The framing device is that it was published for the inauguration of the first ship, which is the UES Polaris. And this is like one of the funniest naming stories. So it's an RSI ship. So of course, like, oh yeah, constellations, Scorpius, Polaris. It's all to do with astronomy, right? Well, it's actually supposed to be named after a person called Hester Polaris, which is a wonderful backwards thing. There's a few examples in the real world where you got these things where it seems like it's named after something obvious, like, oh, German chocolate cake. It must be chocolate cake from Germany. No, it's named after someone called like Mrs. German who invented that chocolate cake. Or according to Winston Churchill in his history writings, the port city of Portsmouth, which is a port on the mouth of a river, was named after its founder, a man called Port, which just seems unlikely to me. Doesn't seem like the most obvious way. But it's named after a UPE commander. If you watch the recent thing where they were designing the UPE fighter uniforms, well, if you look at the picture of Hester Polaris on the wiki or in that brochure, you can see what their officer uniforms were like. And they were kind of a bit like... Well, they were sort of much more demure than the Second Varan War ones that we've seen. Certainly a lot less colourful. So we don't know what they're going to do for future Polaris names. They might have no pattern at all. But you could go either way with this. You could say it's going to be like famous stars. So you have like UES Beetlejuice, or best not say that too many times. Or you could say Great Commanders and have like UES Hannibal and famous generals. That could be quite cool. There's other stuff like MacArthur is supposed to be named after General MacArthur. And the final one where we have, we actually know the class and we've seen the ship is the Javelin, the destroyer. I went into this on my video that we have these 4 different weapons: Javelin, Fleiser, which I say sword, it could be a knife as well as variable, Gauntlet, Warhammer, and the Orpheus Horizon. So the Fleiser, that was documented in a Jump Point story, sort of retrospectively naming the wreck on Daymar. Gauntlet is kind of interesting. It's the so if you look at the Squadron 42 trailer, there is a Javelin right at the start, and then we sort of zoom around it, and then we go inside, and there's Gillian Anderson's character, so Kate McLaren, and so we'd assume that's her ship, and we know from interviews with her that she is the captain of the Gauntlet. We know from essentially leaked stuff about the interior of the Javelin. People are going around, and the word UES Gauntlet is painted all over the walls. So that's how we, putting those together, you see the Javelin, then you see the captain stood inside the Javelin, and we know that it's named, and we've seen this. So yeah, it's a Javelin, and it's that one. And yeah, you know where the Warhammer's from, and you should know where the Orpheus Horizon from. That's from the Squadron 42. Sorry, not Squadron 42. That's from the CitizenCon 2016 Homestead demo, where they had the sandworms on Lear 3. That is the first one we've seen, so like it's not that strange that it doesn't match the pattern. It's a bit sort of more. It certainly isn't quite as grounded as some of the other names, is it? It's quite science fiction, I suppose you could say. But I don't know whether the writing team gave it that name or if it was just something the level designer put in. I don't know if it's still going to be Lord. Maybe they're going to change the name of that ship. Sounds like we're not getting sandworms, so why would we get the same ship?